Bonjour tout le monde. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Battlefield Tours. We have a very special edition this evening. We're commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Canadians landing on Juno Beach during World War II. And we are very lucky this evening to have Rob Woolsey, and he will be sharing with us all about the Canadians landing on Juno Beach.
Thank you very much. So, good evening, everyone. As I said, my name is Rob Woolsey. I'm a member of the Guild of International Battlefield Guides. And what we're going to be talking about today is D-Day at Juno Beach, which is really an important, as Christine said, it's the 80th anniversary. It's a huge event. It is the invasion of France, the Allies coming back to France to defeat the Germans in the Second World War. And in this slide, the title slide, that is actually Bernier-sur-Mer. That is the landing of the 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade, and they are a second or third and fourth wave units. These guys are landing at sometime around noon when this photo was taken off the landing craft, and those are supposedly the Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders of Cornwall, Ontario, coming ashore. So, we're going to talk today about an overview of kind of the country and what we're talking about, some recommended preparations, some travel advisories, helpful tips, some best places to stay, transportation around the area. We're going to give Juno Beach writ large. And then we're going to talk about the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade, which actually stormed Mike Green, Mike Red, and Nan Green sectors of Juno Beach. And then we're going to talk about the 8th Canadian Infantry Brigade, who attacked on Nan White and Nan Red. And then there's a couple of worth of mentions. This photo is actually on the border of Mike Red and Mike Green beaches. This is a memorial to the Canadian Scottish Regiment. So their C Company, we're going to talk about them a little bit later, stormed a section of the beach in support of one of the other units, and they're part of 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade. And that's one of the memorials that I got to go visit last year. So what are we talking about? We are talking about France, but we're in Normandy in the Calvados region. Population as of 2020 was about 107,250 people, which most are living in small villages and hamlets all around the area. It's a beautiful part of France, but also a very tough area to fight a battle in. Of course, the main language is French. The main airport to fly into for international flights is Paris Charles de Gaulle. It's about 3.5 hours away. And if you're talking about a regional airport, you sometimes can fly into Carpiquet Airfield, which happens to be the main objective for the Canadians on D-Day was Carpiquet Airfield. Quick background, it used to actually belong to England. It's the Normans. It's also the home region of William the Conqueror. France is the 10th most expensive country in the world, so it's kind of higher than the average. This area is called the Côte d'Arc. It was the second most fortified beach on all of the 5 invasion beaches. The 3rd Canadian Division suffered the second highest number of casualties of any attacking divisions, and they made it further inland than any other unit in the invasion. And in particular, C Squadron of the 1st Hussars of London, Ontario, actually were the only unit to make it to the final objective of any of the units attacking. But they had to pull back because of lack of support. Now, as a result, there are 3 schools in the Normandy beachhead that were taken on the first day that are named after Canadians that all landed and fought on D-Day. So, recommended preparations. Côte d'Arc is generally quite mild. It's got wet, cool winters and warm, dry summers. It's absolutely gorgeous in the summertime. It's a beach community. Bernier-sur-Mer is literally a beach vacation town. Best time to travel really is the end of April to the end of October. Starting to get into November, it gets really wet and mucky and can be very stormy. A rain jacket is always good to have with you. It's a windbreaker. You never know what's going to rain. And very good footwear, because some of these places that are on the Normandy battlefield, from the coast all the way to inland to the end of the battle, there's some pretty slippery trails, things that you're going to be walking. You'll park your car and you'll walk to, so you want really good footwear. Flip-flops are never a good idea when you're touring battlefields. So always travel with medical insurance. And travel insurance. You never know what's going to go wrong. Really important. All the memorials are child-friendly, and most of the places are too, especially on the waterfront, because they are all beach town kind of locations. And there's a city pass for Caen. So, transportation. Bolt has service in the city of Caen itself, so you might be able to get around that way. Otherwise, there's general taxis. There are many, many guide companies in Normandy. There are lots. Some have old World War II jeeps, or some are dune buggy tours. There's lots out there. I recommend the Guild of Battlefield Guides as a very good source. They're some of the best English-speaking guides in the world. I'm a member of the Guild. Plus, I do battlefield tours as well. I do with Woolsey's War Walks. I guide in Normandy, and it's one of my favorites. But if you are driving around, France is one of those countries that it's really good idea to have your international driver's license. So if you're renting a car, you'll be allowed to. Some countries you are not able to rent a car without one. So now to get to the good stuff. Juno Beach itself. The original name for Juno Beach was in fact Jelly Beach. And the reason for that is because all of the British beaches were named after fish, or that was the plan. So Winston Churchill didn't think it was appropriate for men to be dying on a beach named Jelly, and had it renamed to Juno because it felt it was more appropriate. The training for D-Day began in July of 1943 when the 1st Canadian Corps, under Lieutenant General Harry Crear, later the commander of the 1st Canadian Army in Normandy, was informed that the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, under Major General RFL Rod Keller, would play a role in the upcoming invasion. Training picked up pace in the fall of 1943 with exercises and the receiving of new equipment, such as Sherman duplex drive or amphibious tanks. By the spring of 1944, the plan was for the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, with the 2nd Canadian Armoured Brigade attached under Brigadier R.A. Wyman, who had just come out of Italy, to storm the area from the village of Saint-Aubin to Vaux, an area of about 10 kilometers, with the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade under command of Brigadier Harry Foster, and attached to him was the 1st Hussars, and they would attack between Courcelles-sur-Mer and Vaux. A single company from the Canadian Scottish Regiment would attack on Mike Green opposite the village of Vaux, while 2 companies from the Royal Winnipeg Rifles would attack a sector called Mike Red opposite Grey-sur-Mer, and 2 more in the second wave, and the Regina Rifles would attack a place called Nan Green sector at the village of Courcelles with 2 companies in the first wave and 2 in the second wave. The dividing line between the Mike and Nan sectors was the River Soule, which is actually kind of cuts the town of Courcelles in half. The 8th Canadian Infantry Brigade under Brigadier General Blackadder, yes, we had a General Blackadder, with the Fort Garry Horse, would attack at Nan White, which is at Bernier-sur-Mer, with the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, and at Nan Red, the village of Saint-Aubin, with the North Shore Regiment of New Brunswick, each with 2 companies in the first wave and 2 companies in the second wave, as well as a tank squadron from the Fort Garry Horse. Also included in the second wave were men of the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa, 3rd Canadian Infantry Division's Heavy Weapons Battalion. The 3rd Brigade, the 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade, otherwise known as the Highland Brigade because its 3 units, the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, the Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders, and the Highland Light Infantry, with the Sherbrooke Fusiliers attached, would follow on forces for exploitation and drive onto the final objectives, which happened to be the Camp-Bayeux Highway and the Carpiquet Airfield. The force assembled to storm Juno Beach included 109 Royal Canadian Navy ships, including the destroyers HMCS Algonquin and Sioux, the landing ships infantry HMCS Prince David and Prince Harry. The Royal Canadian Air Force also deployed 230 bombers to specifically hit Juno Beach. Unfortunately, their bombing mission was not very successful. The bombardment force of Force J, or Force Juno, for the Navy fleet began at 5:30 in the morning and was more successful than the air bombardments earlier in the campaign, and knocked out the coastal guns quickly. And at 6:10, the destroyers of the fleet moved in and began targeting close-in beach defenses, along with rocket-firing landing ships, which would fire up to 1,000 rockets in a salvo. Typhoon fighter bombers and M7 self-propelled guns of the Canadian artillery regiments that were in the 3rd Canadian Division, the 12th, 13th, and 14th would actually belong to the division, and the 19th, which was attached, also began firing on shore targets. They were aiming at the main resistance nests or fortifications along the beach, which was WN-27 at the village of Saint-Aubin, WN-28 at Bernier, WN-29 at Courcelles, and WN-31 at the village of Grey. So, to give you some perspective, the original attack was postponed 24 hours because of terrible weather, and it was the largest seaborne invasion in history. The beach itself, Juno Beach, is actually about 9.7 miles long from east to west. It covers a huge area, and it's quite spectacular to see because each area is very, very different. So we are talking about the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade on Mike Green, Mike Red, and Nan Green beaches, Courcelles-sur-Mer. The 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade's plan was to land at 7:35 a.m., but the rough seas and difficulty in getting assembled pushed back the landing time by about 10 minutes. A squadron of the 1st Hussars was to land with the Royal Winnipeg Rifles on Mike Red Beach, but landed after because of launching delays with their duplex drive tanks due to the weather and the rough seas. The Royal Winnipeg Rifles landed at 7:49 a.m., with the tanks landing at about 7:55, with B Company hitting the beach right in front of the strong point at WN 31. And they take terrible, terrible casualties. At the end of the engagement, when they got to their first line objective, there was 26 men still able to fight in B Company of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. D Company of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles landed away from a strong point and met almost no resistance whatsoever. C Company of the Canadian Scottish landed and stormed their first objective to find it completely destroyed. It was one of the few successes of the opening bombardment. Today, where the Canadian Scottish have landed is now a campground called Canadian Scottish Campground, and I've actually stayed there. At 8:30 in the morning, A and C companies, the second wave of the Winnipeg Rifles, landed and moved inland towards the village of Banville, with A Company meeting significant resistance as they advanced. The remaining companies of the Canadian Scottish landed about 8:30 as well, and soon came under heavy mortar fire and took about an hour to get clear of the beaches and move to their next objectives. Nan Green, on the other side of the River Soles, was attacked by A and B companies of the Regina Rifles, with B Squadron of the 1st Hussars, who, the officer commanding that squadron of tanks, Major Duncan, did not actually make it ashore, because as he was running in, a rocket-firing landing craft was fired. Its rockets caused a big wave, swamped his tank, and it promptly sank. He was rescued after spending 2 hours in the water, and they took him back to England, much to his displeasure. The tanks actually landed on this beach at 7:58, and the infantry touched down sometime between 8:09 and 8:15, the two companies touching down at different times. A Company suffered more losses, including its company commander, Major Grosch, who was wounded, than B Company, but both were aided by the tanks already being on the beach, and those tanks knocking out several gun emplacements. C Company of the Regina Rifles landed about 20 minutes later and quickly moved into the village and began clearing it, but D Company's run to the beach was met with complete disaster, with many of their landing craft hitting mines on submerged obstacles, losing their company commander, Major Love, who was killed, and only 49 of the 129 men who loaded onto those landing craft that morning made it to the beach, making it much harder for the Regina Rifles to carry on later that day. So if you look at this map here, this is the village of Courcelles. It looks much bigger today. You'll see where strong point WN 31 is. You can still see much of WN 31, and what's interesting is the Juno Beach Center, which is on the banks of the River Soule. It wasn't actually involved in any of the fighting that took place there, but it was the command post and observation post and was tied to WN 31. The WN 32, the remains of one of the positions of WN 32 is a smashed remain at the far end there, and you can actually go see it today. WN 29, which is the strong point against the Regina Rifles, only parts of it exist today. That seawall has been completely rebuilt and redone, but you can still see some stuff there that's really quite neat. And it's a beautiful little area to go visit. So what can you see at Mike Green, Mike Red, and Nan Green? So the first and most important thing, and one of my favorite places to go, is Bunker Cozy on Mike Red. It's part of WN 31. It was the position that B Company of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles literally landed in front of. It's got two embrasures. It had cannons shooting down the beach, and there's a couple of machine gun positions on either side of it. And they blew it up. It's actually called Bunker Cozy after the man who took it out. It's an incredible bunker to still see. It is falling into the sand because it did get blown up on beach erosion. They've closed the embrasures off now for safety reasons, but it's part of that whole series of fortifications. They're just right beside the Juno Beach Center, and it's all part of that same system of defenses. Right beside it in this other photo is a German 5-centimeter anti-tank gun. It's actually guarding the harbor entrance at Cortelles-sur-Mer. It's part of WN-29, and you can actually see an impressive bit of damage. At exit, so those are different places. So the tank at the bottom is a Churchill Avery. It's called Charlie 1. It's a D-Day veteran. It was knocked out about 100 yards from where it rests today. It's at what's called exit M1. It was actually the cut in the dunes was created to get the troops and tanks and everything off the beach. This is a Churchill Avery there. Part of its crew was killed, and one of its crew members who survived the battle used to go back all the time and was recovered. When he passed away, behind him is where his ashes are spread. So that's considered sacred ground. It's very much marked off, but it's considered a grave. So it's impressive to see this, and this is one of the tanks that helped the Canadians get off the beach. Also in Courcelles is the Regina Rifle Regiment. It's called the Seawall Memorial. There's one on each side of the seawall ramp. There's memorials there. They're just simple plaques. It's really neat. But close to that is also a 1st Hussars Sherman 3 duplex drive tank. So this was a tank that had a screen. They would launch them from the landing craft. They'd swim in. They would drop the screen when they touched the ground because they have propellers on the back, and they would start shooting. This one is one that's been recovered. It was recovered in 30 years after it sank by members of 4th Canadian Brigade Group in Germany in their Remy section, and they've restored it, and it's now covered in plaques from all of the units that fought there. So it's an interesting place. Courcelles, you can totally see why the Regina Rifles would have had a really, really, really tough time getting there. As well, there's a few other places you can go. There's a massive memorial actually at the M1 entrance, which is on Mike Red, Mike Green. There's the typical, and we'll see it in a couple of other photos later, the Normandy Memorial that goes for all of the major locations. It's still there. It's impressive. If you go in the summertime, there will be Canada flags at every memorial, every monument. They're everywhere. You'll see more Canada flags there than you can possibly believe. It is absolutely incredible. Nan white and Nan red. So Nan White is probably the most famous beach associated with Juno Beach and the invasion. And that is because most of the photos taken of Juno Beach happen to be taken at Bernier-sur-Mer. And that is because when the other beaches were closed because the water tide was going up, obstacles were becoming a problem, Bernier-sur-Mer didn't have that same problem. And so most of the troops that came ashore on D-Day came ashore at Bernier-sur-Mer. And so most of the photos and the famous house and all that is here in this photos. If you look at this map, the green square is the Queen's Own Rifles house. It's the infamous house in the photos from Juno Beach. And if you see the little red squares on all the maps, those are gun emplacements or bunkers that you can still see today. So beach exits number on Nan, N1 and N2 used by the Queen's Own Rifles are here. The N2 happens to be the one that is beside the Queen's Own Rifles house. And this house is actually, the Queen's Own Rifles house is actually on the Rue de la Chaudière. So everybody gets a name, everybody gets a street. It's spectacular. So the position WN28 still exists today, which is also kind of neat because most people don't know that it exists. So Nan White is one of the most important beaches. And now the landing part of this beach. The landing of the beach at WN28 is done by the Queen's Own Rifles. And what's interesting about this landing is that it's two brothers that are leading the assault companies. A and B companies of the Queen's Own Rifles are commanded by Major Daltons. Been militia officers for many, many years. They drew straws. Major Charles Dalton said to the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sprague, we shouldn't both be on the first wave. It'll be terrible for our mother. Colonel Sprague said, everybody's drawn a straw. It's fair. You're going. And so they did. So these guys start their run-in. They're running late. They're one of the last units to hit the beach. Their tanks aren't showing up. And the reason their tanks don't show up is that the people that were commanding the landing craft tanks with the duplex drive tanks were trying to move them in closer because they knew they would lose too many tanks. So Queen's Own Rifle hit the beach with no tank support whatsoever. A Company under Major H.E. Dalton makes it clear of most of the beach defenses. They have very, very minimal casualties. They get to the seawall, they get over the seawall, and they start getting into the town, and then they start running into trouble. But really not that many problems for A Company. B Company, on the other hand, their landing craft, except for one that had a damaged rudder, all come in right in front of a strong point WN28. If you look at the map, you'll see lots of little dots there. So the little red square is a 50 or a 5 centimeter German anti-tank gun, and the rest are either machine gun or all machine gun emplacements, and those still all exist today. So B Company, between the time they dropped the ramps on their landing craft assault and they got to WN 28 at the seawall, had suffered 65 men as casualties of 129 landing. So almost 50%. Major Dalton is wounded in the action, getting ashore. He's trying to take out a German position, and he gets hit in the head with a round and is massively concussed and injured. What's interesting is that one little landing craft that gets misplaced, it actually lands a little bit farther towards Saint-Aubin. It comes ashore, the lieutenant and 2 members of the platoon sneak in behind WN28 and blow up the bunker, or take it out. They don't actually blow it up, it's still standing. And then they start clearing it. And so B Company starts getting over. 20 minutes later, C and D Company come in. The difference is that C Company, of course, comes ashore. They have no problems. They landing right behind A Company. They move into the town and start clearing the town. As you can see, quite a large area to clear. And so they're starting to meet resistance. D Company comes ashore, and their landing craft hit mines just like D Company of the Regina Rifles. The difference is that most of D Company of the Queen's Own Rifles make it ashore. They just lose their boat and lose a lot of their equipment, and they have to kind of salvage and reset. But they too move into the town with minimal losses. So they blast into the shore, and it's been a tough fight. Just west of them is the village of Saint-Aubin. And who goes in here is the North Shore Regiment. What's interesting is A Company is under command of Major J.A. McNaughton, who happens to be 47 years old and is the oldest company commander that lands on D-Day of all the invasion forces. He's a First World War veteran. He didn't have to serve, but he did. And then B Squadron under Major Forbes, later becomes CO of the regiment. They storm ashore. The problem is that at Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, where they come ashore, the seawall is about 20 feet tall in places. It's really quite a challenge to get them ashore. And there's some very famous film footage of troops breaking out of a landing craft. Those are members of the North Shore Regiment storming Saint-Aubin. So they break through, and get into Saint-Aubin and start clearing it. But because of all the problems of the beaches at Saint-Aubin in particular, because the beach is small, the seawall is high, they close that wall. So nobody comes in behind the North Shore Regiment and C Squadron of the Fort Garry Horse. So they're kind of left on their own. Back to Bernier-sur-Mer. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the 3rd Regiment of 8th Canadian Brigade, Le Régiment de la Chaudière, begins to land right behind. And they actually struggle getting through Bernier-sur-Mer because, of course, the Queen's Own Rifles are still trying to clear it. And they got dropped off into chest deep water. Their landing didn't go well. They lost a lot of equipment, and it took them a long time to reset and reorganize. And just as they were getting outside of Bernier-sur-Mer, where's a memorial today to Canadian artillery crews, they ambush, the Chaudières get ambushed with these 3 self-propelled guns from 13th Field Regiment, and a whole platoon gets killed almost instantaneously in an ambush, and it's a really tough fight. So, but they end up moving off with the Queen's Own Rifles, come in, sweep out, clear them, and the attack continues. And then everybody keeps their driving inland. So what can you see? Well, at Nan White, which is one of my favorite places to go, quite honestly, the bunker that's WN28 still exists, as well as a couple of those Tobruk machine gun posts. And you can see them in the photos here in the thing. So that octagonal one with the Queen's Own Rifle plaque on it, that's actually a Tobruk machine gun position. The back half of it is now gone because the seawall was modified a bit in the 1970s. But that's one of the machine guns that is on the promenade right in front between Queen's Own Rifles House, which is the building below, which I will talk about shortly, and the bunker, which is the bottom left-hand photo that has the Queen's Own Rifles memorial on it. It no longer has its anti-tank gun. So the bunker used to hold, as I said, a 5 centimeter anti-tank gun. The side facing the sea has a few other unit plaques on it. There's one for the Chaudières, the Stormont Dundas and Glengarry Highlanders, and other units that came ashore at there, but they are not as important as the Queen's Own Rifle, which takes precedence over all of them on the top. What's interesting about this bunker is, and I always get asked this question, is why is it so open on the backside? Well, there was wooden crates stacked there to keep it protected from shell fire and blasts from behind, but it was designed to be protected from direct fire from the sea. And so the thickest part of its wall happens to face the sea, and it shoots down the beach, not out to sea, because the concept was it'll shoot down the beach and be able to get more people. Right beside this, there's a memorial to the Fort Garry Horse and the Regiment de la Chaudière, which happens to be in another tobruk. It happens to be where those flagpoles are behind it in the top photo. And there, of course, there's all the flagpoles of all the Allied nations that landed. And this is the position, that machine gun, and then this tobruk here, or this bunker here, did most of the damage to B Company in the first wave. It's also in many, many photos of the beach. You'll see Canadian wounded and guys digging in on Juno Beach. It's actually in front of this bunker on the in the sand. It's actually pretty neat. Besides Queen's Own Rifles House, which was exit N2, there's a series of other D-Day memorials like those on Mike Red, basically signifying it was a D-Day landing beach. The Queen's Own Rifles House is probably the most famous house of the beach. It's first liberated by the Canadians. It's the first house to be liberated by us. And it's in almost all the famous photos of the landing. Behind and beside it, there's the old train station, and there's a park. There's another little brief Inuktitut Canadian memorial, but there's also some war remains there in the form of some of the triangle concrete obstacles that used to be on the beach. And they've been put them back there to show them what they look like. You will sometimes hear Queen's Own Rifle House called Canada House. It is not Canada House. It is Queen's Own Rifles House. They liberated it, and they are very, very proud of that fact. Nan Red. So Nan Red has a series of memorials as well. Even though it was really small in comparison to the other beaches, not as many things came to shore here, it's quite important. So Nan Red still has a bunker that contains its 5 centimeter anti-tank gun. It's the photo on the very right-hand side. And close to it, there are memorials to the North Shore, the Fort Garry Horse, 16th Field Engineer Squadron of the Canadian Engineers, 19th Field Regiment of the Royal Canadian Artillery, who also came ashore here. And there's also a memorial to the 48th Royal Marine Commandos that also came in, but their target was a little bit farther off and not part of the same group that we were attacking. And basically, these guys were supposed to link up with Sword Beach. There's an interesting now and then photo actually taken at Bernier or at Saint-Aubin. If you stand at the gun position and look out towards to the west more or east more, sorry, east, you can see there's a picture there, and it's of an American fighter plane that gets shot down. The pilot is killed, and you can actually see where that actually lands because it's the seawall, and that frontage has not changed today. It's pretty spectacular, actually. There's a plaque commemorating it's worth it to see. So the big marble plaque has a list of the members who fell on the beach from all of the Canadian units, and that's listed there. There's the big cairn, which represents the thing. And of course, there's that. There's also another park just down the road from it, where one of the other North Shore companies. It's in a park. I've never actually been to it because every time I go there, the park's been full of events stuff. So, but it's also there. It's one of the other landing markers for the North Shore Regiment. So, the 3rd Canadian Division continued to push inland, with the Royal Winnipeg Rifles making it as far as the village's Cruelly, linking up with the British forces moving in from Gold Beach, and then pushed past the village, making it to their second objective line. The Canadian Scottish crossed over behind them and pushed past their villages, making it even further inland, taking the village of Cannet, Pierre Point, and Fresnes-Camilly, stopping just short of the village of Camilly, which was halfway between the second and third objective lines. The Regina Rifles moved in and captured Reeves, and then Fontaine Henry, where B Company Commander Major Peters was killed. Brigadier General Foster and the headquarters of 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade moved inland and set up at the town of Colombie-sur-Saulx. The 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade ended D-Day on the second objective line, codenamed Elm. But a single troop, as I said earlier, from C Squadron of Hussars actually made it to Oak, but had to pull back. The 8th Canadian Infantry Brigade landed the Chaudières around 9 a.m. and they struggled to get moving out. But when they moved off with the Queen's Own Rifles, they captured Menées-sur-Mer, where the Canadian cemetery is today, and the village of Basley, stopping eventually at Colombey-sur-Thalon, which was on the second objective line, Elm. The Queen's Own Rifles went east from Basley, taking the village of Agunary and a place called Hill 70 in a crazy uphill charge against the Germans with about a dozen guys and all armed with machine guns, knocking them off the top of that hill, making them the unit that made it furthest inland of any first wave landing unit of the invasion. The North Shore Regiment moved inland and took Tailleville, losing Major McNaughton, who was killed in action there, who again was the oldest company commander of the invasion. They moved up to a radar station, which you can visit today, which is called S Strong Point Douvres. It's a very complete radar station. And that was supposed to be their next objective, but they had no support coming in behind them, and with its losses and artillery and extra tanks being pulled away from them to help continue the drive towards the final objective, they asked not to attack it, and they were told not to. A British unit came up and decided they were trying to attack it, and promptly fell back when they got plastered by the German defenders. That radar station stood in the middle of the beachhead until the 17th of June, when it was just taken up by a deliberate attack. The link between Juno and Juno Beach actually did not happen on D-Day. The 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade landed behind the 8th on Nan White at Bernier-sur-Mer, beginning at noon, with the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, the Stormont Dundas and Glengarry Highlanders, and the Highland Light Infantry in that order. The Sherbrooke Fusiliers landed alongside the North Nova Scotias, and the two formed a battle group, which took until 4 p.m. to actually get organized and out of the beachhead area and drive toward the village of Villon-les-Buissons, where the Canadian advance halted for the night. It's now called Hell's Corner, and there's a big memorial there. Making the 3rd Canadian Division the attacking formation with the greatest inland advance of any on D-Day. While they did not make it to their final objective line, they did make, and it would not make it for another month. It was a huge accomplishment, and it was also the second hardest beach to capture, with Canada suffering the second highest number of casualties of any of the attacking divisions. Only Omaha Beach in the American sector was worse, and it was about 4 to 5 times worse than what we suffered. D-Day cost Canada 340 soldiers killed, 574 wounded, and 47 captured, with the Queen's Own Rifles suffering the most, with 143 casualties, including 65 dead. 128 men were lost with the Winnipeg Rifles, 125 with the North Shore, and 108 with the Regina Rifles. And all of those are first wave units. So the guys that attacked first took the worst amount of casualties on D-Day. Of the landing craft used, 90 of 306 were destroyed or lost or damaged, and the 2nd Canadian Armoured Brigade lost 42 tanks knocked out, and with 24 that had some form of damage or breakdown on the day, and 3 self-propelled guns were also destroyed. D-Day was a massively significant event for Canada, but we can't forget that the Battle of Normandy does not include Juno Beach. Juno Beach was the beginning of the Battle of Normandy, and for 57 more days, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division would fight inland in some of the most brutal and difficult fights of the war. If you ever get a chance to visit Normandy, there is so much to see, and I highly recommend it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's so wonderful to have you here for the 80th anniversary and to be able to learn more about the Canadians and what happened when they landed on Juno Beach. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Just a note that we will be taking a break for the summer, so look for new battlefield tours happening this fall. Thank you so much. Merci tout le monde.
Merci. Thank you, everyone.